I was still bleeding from emergency surgery, holding my 3-day-old son to my chest for a feeding, when my biological family trapped me in my own maternity suite. My father threw legal papers onto my lap, demanding a signature that would steal my son's entire future. When I refused, he suddenly grabbed me by the hair and dragged me across the bed. As my baby kept screaming, he gave my body a violent shock. And then, what happened next was absolutely unbelievable. Before I jump into the story, you all know I love seeing where you're watching from and what time it is over there. But today, I have a deeper question for you. Have you ever been completely betrayed by your own blood? Or do you believe family is always loyal? Drop your location, your time, and a yes or no in the comments right now. My name is Chloe, and for 30 years, I was the girl who kept her head down, smiled through the slights, and desperately tried to buy the love of a family that only valued people with a price tag. Growing up in the old money shadows of Boston, Massachusetts, I was taught that appearance was everything. My father, Richard, always said that a family's reputation was written in the assets they owned, not the affection they showed. I used to think that if I worked hard enough, if I became successful enough on my own, they would finally look at me the way they looked at my older brother, Mason. I poured my life into becoming an architectural designer. I built a career from nothing, working 80-hour weeks, designing luxury spaces for people who had the kind of wealth my father worshipped. But my achievements were always treated like background noise at the dinner table. When I met Liam, everything changed. Liam didn't care about corporate portfolios or old money prestige. He is a high school history teacher, a man who measures his days by the kids he helps and the quiet kindness he brings into the world. When we married, my family treated our wedding like a funeral. My mother, Eleanor, actually wore black, whispering to her friends that I was settling for a man on a civil servant's salary. But the truth was, I had hit the lottery with Liam. For the first time in my life, I knew what real security felt like. And it didn't stop with him. His parents, Susan and Thomas, welcomed me into their lives with open arms and zero expectations. Thomas, a retired corporate attorney with a sharp mind and a gentle soul, treated me with more respect in our first dinner together than my father had in 3 decades. For 3 years, Liam and I lived in a cozy, sunlit brick townhouse saving our money, completely content in our own little world. I genuinely believed that by distancing myself from my family's toxic obsession with wealth, I had escaped their reach. I thought that the birth of my first child would be a bridge, a moment where even my cold, calculated parents would see the beauty of new life and put their greed aside. I was completely, utterly wrong. To understand why my family turned into monsters, you have to understand the $12 million timber trust fund. It was a massive fortune set up by my late grandfather, a ruthless real estate tycoon who didn't trust his own children. He knew my father, Richard, was a superficial spender, and he knew my brother, Mason, was lazy. So, in his will, grandfather locked the core of the family wealth away in an airtight legal trust. The condition he set was entirely old-fashioned, archaic, and cruel. The entire $12 million fortune, along with control of the family real estate firm's primary voting shares, would automatically transfer to the first, biological mother of the next generation's grandson. For 7 long years, my brother Mason and his wife, Harper, tried to claim that prize. Harper was a deeply insecure, narcissistic woman who wore designer labels like Armor and viewed me with utter contempt because I worked for a living. She wanted that $12 million more than she wanted air. But she was completely infertile. My parents poured hundreds of thousands of dollars from the company's dwindling operating accounts into premium IVF treatments, flying Harper to elite clinics from New York to London. Every failed cycle made the family home more toxic. During those 7 years, I was treated like the family's personal insurance policy and ATM. Whenever the business ran low on cash because of Harper's medical bills or my father's desperate attempts to maintain an upper-class image, they would turn to me. "Chloe, we need you to co-sign this bridge loan," Richard would demand, not even asking how my architectural firm was doing. "Chloe, let Mason use your corporate credit line for his office renovations." Family helps family. I gave up my time, my credit score, and my peace of mind, always hoping that my sacrifices would earn me a seat at their table. My mother, Eleanor, would constantly remind me of my place. At Sunday dinners, she would look right past me and pat Harper's hand, saying, "Don't worry, darling. When you give us our boy, this entire family will finally be secure." I was just the background daughter, the one married to a poor school teacher, the one whose future didn't matter because I couldn't provide the mail. Ere my father needed to unlock grandfather's millions. Then the unthinkable happened. After years of being told I was focusing too much on my career, Liam and I found out we were expecting. It wasn't planned. It wasn't a calculated corporate strategy. It was a miracle. And at our 12-week scan, the doctor looked at the screen, smiled and said, "It's a boy." I didn't even think about the trust fund. I was just ecstatically happy to be a mother. But the moment the news leaked to my family, the atmosphere shifted from cold neglect to suffocating paranoia. Harper stopped speaking to me entirely. Mason wouldn't look me in the eye. My father suddenly started calling me 3 times a day, pretending to care about my prenatal vitamins, but always subtly steering the conversation toward grandfather's will. "You know, Chloe," he would say, his voice dripping with fake warmth, "that old trust fund is complicated. A girl like you, married to a teacher, wouldn't know how to handle that kind of corporate responsibility. We'll need to sort out some paperwork before the baby arrives." I brushed it off, too tired from my pregnancy to realize that my own flesh and blood were looking at my growing belly, not as a grandchild, but as a multi-million-dollar obstacle that needed to be neutralized. The labor was a nightmare. My son's heart rate plummeted during a sudden, terrifying drop in my blood pressure, and the doctors at Boston General Hospital had to rush me into an emergency C-section. When I finally woke up from the heavy sedation, shivering under the thin hospital blankets, the agonizing pain across my lower abdomen felt like a burning iron. But the moment the nurse placed my beautiful 7-pound baby boy into my arms, the pain faded into static. Liam and I cried tears of pure exhaustion and relief. We named him Noah. By the 3rd morning, the reality of grandfather's trust fund hit the real estate firm's legal team. A formal notification was triggered automatically by the estate executors, identifying me as the primary beneficiary of the $12 million fortune. I was still trapped in my bed, hooked up to an IV pole and a urinary catheter, barely able to sit up without gasping for air. At around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Liam kissed my forehead. "I'm going down to the ground floor administration office, sweetie," he whispered. "The insurance company is pushing back on the emergency surgical coverage. I need to sort this out before we get discharged tomorrow." "Go," I smiled weakly. "Noah and I will be right here." 10 minutes after Liam left, the heavy wooden door to my private maternity suite clicked open. I expected a nurse with my pain medication. Instead, my father, Richard, walked in. Behind him came my mother, Eleanor, my brother, Mason, and his wife, Harper. The room instantly felt suffocating. Harper's face was twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated venom as she stared at the plastic bassinet where Noah lay sleeping. "Dad, Mom, what are you doing here?" I asked, my voice raspy. "Visiting hours don't start until—" "Cut the act, Chloe," Richard snapped, pulling a thick stack of legal documents out of his designer leather briefcase. He tossed them onto my lap, right over my bandaged, throbbing incision. "We don't have time for pleasantries. Your husband is downstairs and we need this settled right now." I looked down. The bold letters at the top of the page read, "Irrevocable waiver of trust property and assignment of rights." "What is this?" I whispered, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. "It's your exit ticket," Mason sneered, stepping closer to the bed. "You're going to sign those rights over to me. Harper and I are the ones who run the family image. You're married to a public school teacher, Chloe. What are you going to do with a real estate empire? Give it to a guy who drives a beat-up Honda?" "This belongs to my son," I said, my voice shaking but firm. I clutched Noah closer to my chest as he began to squirm. "Grandfather left this to the first grandson's mother. Noah is that grandson. I am not signing this." "You selfish little brat!" Harper screamed, her facade completely cracking. "I spent 7 years destroying my body with hormones for that money. You think you can just pop out a kid naturally and steal my life?" "Eleanor, watch the door," Richard commanded coldly. My mother immediately stepped into the small entryway, turning her back to the room, looking through the glass pane into the hallway to act as a lookout. Richard leaned over my bed, his breath smelling of expensive coffee and stale cigars. "Listen to me, Chloe. If you don't sign this right now, I will personally fire your architectural firm from every single development project our company controls in Boston. I will ruin your credit. I will take back everything we ever gave you." "No," I gasped, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. "Get out of my room. Nurses, help." Before I could scream a second time, Richard's hand flew out. He grabbed a fist full of my hair at the back of my head and violently jerked me forward. The sudden, brutal movement ripped the IV line straight out of my left arm, sending a spray of blood across the white sheets. "You think you're smart?" Richard hissed, dragging my upper body off the mattress. The physical agony was blinding. I felt the heavy surgical staples in my lower abdomen tear wide open under the immense strain. I let out a gut-wrenching scream as I was shoved off the edge of the bed, collapsing onto the hard, cold tile floor. Noah's bassinet rocked violently from the impact as I fell against it. My baby woke up, letting out a piercing, terrified shriek. I lay there bleeding through my gown, clutching my ripped stomach while Harper coldly picked up the legal pen from the floor and threw it at my face. "Sign it or we take the baby next," Mason threatened, stepping over my legs. Just then, the sound of a heavy metal chart trolley rattling in the hallway echoed outside. Eleanor panicked. "Someone's coming!" "Richard, stop. We have to go." Richard glared down at me, tucking the unsigned papers back into his briefcase. "This isn't over, Chloe," he whispered, his voice deadly calm. "You play dirty. We play dirtier." They turned and sprinted out of the secondary exit just as a nurse opened the main door. When Liam ran into the room seconds later, he found me sprawled on the blood-splattered tile floor, convulsing in pain while 3 nurses tried to apply pressure to my ruptured incision. Noah was screaming so hard his tiny face had turned blue. I remember the absolute terror in Liam's eyes, the way his voice cracked as he yelled for the emergency surgical team. They rushed me back into the operating room to restitch my abdomen. And for 4 hours under the bright surgical lights, my fear completely burned away. The next morning, the hospital administration called the Boston Police Department. But my family had already built their defensive wall because there were no security, cameras inside a private maternity suite. My father had Mason, Harper, and my mother, Eleanor, sign matching statements claiming I had suffered a post-labor dizzy spell and fell while trying to carry Noah. The police officer looked at me with pity, clearly not wanting to get involved in an old money family dispute without video evidence. While I lay there, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from Richard. "The police won't help you. Chloe, sign the waiver or our corporate lawyers will tie you up in custody and trust. Disputes until you are completely bankrupt. Choose wisely." I stared at the screen and something inside me snapped. The crying stopped. The desperation for my parents' approval, the desire to be accepted by my brother, it all evaporated into a freezing, calculated rage. I looked at Liam, who was holding Noah with a protective, fierce grip, and then I looked at my father-in-law, Thomas, who was sitting in the corner armchair with a legal pad on his lap. "Thomas," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion, "can my father legally use the trust's money to fight me in court?" Thomas adjusted his glasses, a sharp, dangerous smile touching his lips. "Not if you officially assume control of the trust first. Chloe, according to your grandfather's framework, the moment you provide a certified birth certificate of a male heir, you aren't just a beneficiary. You become the managing trustee. You hold the controlling voting shares of your father's entire real estate firm." I wiped the last remaining tear from my face. My biological family thought they could use my physical vulnerability to break me. They didn't realize they had just handed a loaded gun to the most meticulous architectural planner they had ever met. "Thomas," I said, leaning back against the pillows, "open your laptop. We are going to build a cage for my father, and I want to make sure he never steps out of it." For the next 3 weeks, while pretending to recover quietly at home, I worked under total radio silence. I refused every call from my mother, ignored Mason's threatening emails, and let them believe their intimidation tactics had worked. I let them think I was terrified, isolated, and submissive. While behind closed doors, Thomas and I prepared a legal avalanche that would bury them alive. My family thought they were chess grandmasters, but they forgot that as an architectural designer, my entire job is to analyze structural weaknesses and pull the right pillar to make the whole building collapse. On a Tuesday morning, exactly 4 weeks after my nightmare in the hospital, Thomas and I quietly marched into the private offices of the Timber Trust executors. I laid Noah's certified birth certificate, my medical records from the assault, and my grandfather's original deed on the mahogany table. By noon, the legal transition was complete. I was officially the managing trustee of the $12 million estate. This meant I now controlled 51% of the voting shares of Richard's real estate empire. My father and brother were no longer my bosses. Legally, they were my employees, but I wasn't going to just fire them. That would be too quick, too merciful. I wanted them to feel the walls closing in, exactly like I did on that hospital floor. Thomas began a forensic financial audit of the company's books, using my new authority to access every hidden account. What we found was a goldmine of corruption. For the past 3 years, believing that Mason would eventually inherit the wealth, Richard had been secretly taking out massive secondary business loans from Boston Merchant Bank. To secure these loans, he had forged my late grandfather's signature and used the future equity of the $12 million trust as collateral. It was a textbook definition of federal bank fraud and grand larceny. They had used that stolen money to buy Mason a luxury penthouse, fund Harper's failed $80,000 IVF treatments, and lease top-of-the-line Mercedes-Benzes to keep up appearances. If we take this straight to the police, Chloe, Thomas explained, showing me the falsified bank signatures, their high-priced corporate defense, lawyers will stall the case in court for years. They might get off on a technicality. Then we won't give them a chance to prepare a defense, I replied, my voice as cold as ice. When is the annual Boston Real Estate Gala? Next Thursday, Thomas smiled. Your father is scheduled to receive the Lifetime Achievement Award. Perfect, I said. Let's make sure it's a night he never forgets. I secretly used the trust's capital to buy out the main corporate sponsorship for the gala, giving me absolute control over the event's schedule, multimedia presentations, and seating arrangements. I then personally reached out to the lead investigator at the Federal Forensic Audit Division and a prominent investigative journalist from the Boston Chronicle, who had been trying to expose old money corporate fraud for years. I promised them an airtight front-row seat to the biggest financial takedown of the decade. Meanwhile, I maintained my submissive facade. I sent a text message to my mother, Eleanor. Mom, I'm tired of fighting. I've decided to sign the trust waiver. I'll bring the documents to the gala on Thursday, so we can celebrate as a family. Please tell Dad. The response from my mother came within 2 minutes, dripping with fake affection. Oh, Chloe, darling, I always knew you were a good girl who cared about family. Your father is so pleased. We've reserved prime seats for you and Liam at the VIP head table. They were so blinded by their greed, so arrogant in their belief that they had successfully bullied a traumatized new mother that they didn't even bother to double-check. The gala's updated program. While Harper spent the week bragging on social media about the designer gown she bought for the event and Mason practiced his victory speech, Thomas and I were finalizing the digital presentation that would play on the ballroom's giant LED screens. I spent every night looking at the scar on my abdomen, feeling no pain anymore. Only the steady, heavy heartbeat of a mother about to protect her child's future by destroying the monsters who tried to rip it away. The grand ballroom at the Boston Marriott was breathtaking, filled with hundreds of New England's real estate elite, high-profile politicians, and local media. My family sat at the center VIP table, practically radiating arrogance. Harper was draped in diamonds, smirking at me as Liam and I took our seats. My father, Richard, leaned over and whispered, "Smart move. Chloe, hand over the signed waiver after my speech, and we'll forget you ever tried to cross us." I just smiled and nodded. Of course, Dad. Tonight is all about exposure. 10 minutes later, the lights dimmed. The master of ceremonies stepped to the podium. And now, to present the Lifetime Achievement Award to Richard, we have a special tribute presentation produced by our main sponsor. My father stood up, straightening his tuxedo jacket, basking in the loud applause as he walked up the stairs to the main stage. He stood behind the golden microphone, waving to the crowd. But instead of his corporate highlight reel playing on the massive 30-foot LED screens behind him, the entire ballroom's surround sound system suddenly blasted a piercing, familiar sound. A baby crying? It was Noah. Before anyone could confuse it for a technical glitch, my voice echoed through the speakers, loud and crystal clear. This belongs to my son. Noah is that grandson. I am not signing this. Then came Richard's snarling, amplified voice booming over the horrified audience. Sign it or we take the baby next. Eleanor, watch the door. The ballroom fell into a dead, suffocating silence. On the giant screens, instead of real estate portfolios, Thomas and I projected the high-resolution medical photographs of my torn surgical staples, followed by the certified bank audit, reports showing the forged signatures Richard and Mason had used to steal millions from the Timber Trust. Richard froze on stage, his face turning a sickly, ghostly white under the bright spotlight. He looked down at our table, his eyes wide with absolute terror. Mason stood up, knocking his champagne glass over, screaming at the tech booth to shut it down. But my security team blocked him. Right on cue, 4 sharply dressed federal marshals and 2 uniformed Boston police officers walked down the main aisle of the ballroom. They stepped right up onto the stage, interrupting the presentation. In front of the flashing cameras of the local news press, the marshals grabbed my father's arms and clicked heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. Simultaneously, 2 more officers pinned Mason against the VIP table, forcing his hands behind his back as Harper shrieked in horror, trying to shield her face from the cameras. The legal fallout was total and merciless. To avoid a 15-year federal prison sentence for bank fraud and grand larceny, Richard was forced to liquidate his personal assets, including their historic Boston mansion, to repay every single cent stolen from the trust. He and my mother Eleanor were left completely bankrupt. They now live in a cramped, state-subsidized trailer park on the outskirts of the state, surviving entirely on food stamps. Harper, unable to handle the public humiliation and sudden poverty, filed for a bitter divorce within a month, taking what little Mason had left and leaving my brother broke, homeless, and working a minimum-wage graveyard shift just to afford a tiny studio apartment. As for me, I stand in the sunlit nursery of our new home, watching Liam rock Noah to sleep. The $12 million timber trust is safely locked away in a secure estate, entirely clean of my family's corruption, waiting to fund my son's future. I learned the hard way that blood doesn't make you family. But as I hold my husband's hand, I know my son will grow up surrounded by real love, protected by a mother who will always do whatever it takes to ensure justice is served. Looking back at everything I went through in that hospital room, I realized that blood only makes you related. It's loyalty, love, and respect that truly make you family. I didn't want to destroy the people who gave me life. But when they threatened my newborn son, my maternal instincts took over and karma handled the rest. Now my son is safe, the toxic greed is gone, and justice has finally been served. But I want to hear from you. Do you think I did the right thing by exposing my own family on that stage? Or did I go too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found value or strength in my journey today, please subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon to join our community for daily stories of justice.